When the exact nature of a crime is in dispute, the Supreme Court of the Philippines serves as the final authority on exactly how to weigh human intent against physical action. On the morning of July 31, 2009, Armando Arquivedo raised a bolo and struck down his sister-in-law, Lilia. Seconds later, he turned that same weapon on his own brother, Ruben. The regional trial court evaluated the bloodshed and convicted Armando of two severe crimes: murder for the death of Lilia, and frustrated murder for the injuries inflicted on Ruben. Upon review, the Supreme Court intervened. They upheld Lilia's murder conviction, but they downgraded the charge regarding Ruben from frustrated murder to frustrated homicide. One continuous attack with the same weapon resulted in two distinct legal classifications. To understand this ruling, we must dissect how the court parses a victim's situational awareness to determine the presence of alevosía, or treachery. During the trial, Armando's pioneering legal defense rested on the claim that Lilia and Ruben attacked him first, forcing him to retaliate. Invoking self-defense is a high-risk legal strategy. By doing so, the accused openly admits to committing the violent act. The burden of proof immediately shifts onto them to justify it through clear and convincing evidence. To succeed, the defense must first prove unlawful aggression by the victims. Under Philippine law, this is a sine qua non, an absolute prerequisite. Without it, self-defense collapses entirely. This medical data table maps the physical reality. Lilia's autopsy indicates death from massive bleeding via deep wounds. Ruben's records show 6 near-fatal hacking strikes. Adding Armando's report reveals a stark contrast. His injuries were documented as merely superficial cuts. This glaring disparity in tissue damage dismantles Armando's testimony. A man claiming to be the victim of a coordinated, life-threatening assault by 2 armed attackers does not walk away practically unscathed, while leaving one assailant dead and the other critically maimed. Because the physical evidence contradicts the claim of grave peril, unlawful aggression cannot be established. Legally, the violence ceases to be an act of self-defense and becomes an unprovoked retaliation. With self-defense ruled out, the prosecution pushed for maximum penalties, arguing the attack was premeditated. They pointed to a bitter, ongoing land dispute between the brothers over family property. This documented threat provided the basis for the prosecution's claim, a barangay letter recorded almost a month prior to the incident, where Armando explicitly threatened to kill both Lilia and Ruben. However, the revised penal code imposes a rigorous threshold for evident premeditation. A documented threat is not an automatic qualifier. First, the prosecution must prove the exact time the offender actively determined to commit the crime. Second, there must be a sufficient lapse of time between that determination and the execution. The law requires proof of a window where the offender had the opportunity to reflect, allowing cold thought to overcome their violent impulse. The Supreme Court viewed Armando's blotter entry as an expression of intense hatred, not evidence of a calculated timeline. There was no clear proof showing exactly when Armando plotted the specific ambush of July 31st. General animosity and prior documented threats are legally insufficient to qualify a killing. Without a proven timeline of cold reflection, the claim of evident premeditation fails. While premeditation failed, the murder charge for Lilia was upheld due to the presence of a different qualifying circumstance: treachery, legally known as alevosía. The mechanics of the attack matter. Minutes before the violence, Armando bumped into Lilia on a rural path. A sharp verbal altercation broke out. Ruben intervened, urged his wife to ignore Armando, and they agreed to move on. A common misconception in criminal law is that any prior verbal altercation serves as a warning, thereby giving the victim a chance to defend themselves and negating treachery. This schematic illustrates the movements concluding their dispute. Ruben and Lilia agreed to walk away, turning their backs on Armando. Lilia's situational awareness shifted, believing the squabble was settled. Taking advantage, Armando instantly closed the distance, striking Lilia from behind while she was defenseless. The core essence of treachery is execution without risk. It occurs when an attacker deliberately exploits a victim's lack of situational awareness to eliminate any chance of resistance. Because Armando waited for the dispute to officially end, allowing Lilia to lower her guard and turn her back, she was rendered functionally defenseless. That calculated strike makes her death unequivocally murder. The attack on Ruben happened more seconds later, yet the court classified it entirely differently. Returning to the schematic, we observe Ruben's sensory trigger. Hearing the bolo strike Lilia, Ruben rotated back toward Armando, witnessing the assault. Instead of fleeing, Reuben dropped his heavy load of cassava and rushed directly at his armed brother to intervene. Jurisprudential rules established in prior Supreme Court cases dictate that if a victim is forewarned of a danger and chooses to meet it anyway, treachery cannot be applied. Reuben's visual and auditory awareness of the attack on his wife removed the element of a sudden, unforeseen ambush against him. He saw the weapon. He saw the violence in progress. The court reasoned that by actively rushing in to intercept an armed assailant, Reuben consciously accepted the danger to his own life. He chose to be courageous rather than cautious. Legally, that informed choice cancels the application of treachery, because the victim was no longer caught completely off guard. Fully forewarned, Reuben met the danger head-on. Consequently, Armando's attack on him lacked the required elements for frustrated murder, compelling the court to downgrade the charge to frustrated homicide. With the crimes established, the court calculated the penalties by factoring in modifying circumstances. Armando was credited with one sole mitigating circumstance: voluntary surrender. He sought out barangay officials and eventually turned himself in to the local police. This legal credit requires strict conditions. The accused must not have been actually arrested yet, and they must submit voluntarily, specifically to save the state time and expense of a manhunt. Murder is penalized by reclusion perpetua to death. With one mitigating circumstance and no aggravating ones, the sentence locks to reclusion perpetua. For Reuben, homicide is reclusion temporal, but because the felony was frustrated, Article 50 drops it down 1 degree to prison mayor. Applying the indeterminate sentence law alongside his mitigating circumstance, the court arrived at a precise final sentence for the attack on Reuben: a minimum of 4 years and 2 months of prison correctional, up to a maximum of 8 years of prison mayor. We return to the paradox that started this analysis. One man, one weapon, and one continuous event resulted in vastly different legal outcomes. The revised penal code does not evaluate criminal liability based solely on the severity of the violence inflicted or the tragic nature of the outcome. The legal fulcrum of People v. Archivito rests entirely on the micromechanics of the victim's situational awareness in the seconds before the blade fell. It is a reminder that physical evidence, like the depth and distribution of wounds, will reliably override a defendant's narrative claims of self-defense. The law defines guilt through the specific degree of vulnerability the attacker chooses to exploit.